$300. I stared at the HOA fine in disbelief, my blood absolutely boiling. They were fining me for building a road on my own land. A 300-foot access road I designed myself as a civil engineer, fully permitted by the county. Then Constance Hartwell, the power-hungry HOA president, showed up on my porch, smirking, demanding I pay up immediately. "Mr. Webb, you will comply with community standards," she sneered, waving the fine like a weapon. "Pay now, or we'll lien your property." "Really?" I replied, stepping closer. "And how do you plan to access your neighborhood when I block the easement?" Her smug expression faltered. "What easement?" "The one and only road giving your entire 47-home subdivision legal access to the highway, the one running through my corner property." She thought she was shaking me down for $300. She actually just handed me the power to make her whole neighborhood worthless overnight. Comment your state if you've ever dealt with a crazy HOA. Let me tell you how a $300 HOA fine turned into the biggest mistake of one woman's political career. 6 months ago, I was Marcus Webb, freshly divorced civil engineer, sitting in an empty apartment staring at papers that cut my life in half. 25 years designing municipal infrastructure for ungrateful bureaucrats who couldn't tell a storm drain from a donut hole. At 52, I was done being pushed around. That's when I found the 2.3-acre corner lot in Willowbrook. The moment I saw those property lines on the survey map, something clicked. This wasn't just land, this was leverage. The lot sat at the perfect intersection, controlling access between the county road and the entire subdivision. Previous owner was an old farmer who'd held onto it for decades, probably laughing at all the city folk who built around him. Smart man. I bought it cash. Best impulse purchase of my life. The farmhouse needed everything, but I had time and tools. Morning coffee mixed with the smell of fresh sawdust became my new routine. The satisfying weight of my hammer driving nails into solid wood, rebuilding something that would last. For 3 peaceful months, I thought I'd found paradise. Then I met Constance Hartwell. Picture the most power-hungry HOA president you can imagine. Then add bleach blonde hair, nails sharp enough to cut glass, and a voice that could shatter windows. This woman drove a white BMW SUV covered in bumper stickers. Community standards matter, respect authority, and, I kid you not, Willowbrook pride. The sound of her designer heels clicking on pavement announced her presence like a warning siren. Our first meeting, she cited me for a mailbox that was 2 inches below regulation height. A mailbox that had been there since Reagan was president. The citation was printed on HOA letterhead so official-looking you'd think she was the IRS, but that was just her opening move. Over the next month, Constance went on a citation rampage that would make a traffic cop jealous. Mrs. Rodriguez got hit for bird feeders attracting undesirable wildlife. Apparently, cardinals don't meet Willowbrook's aesthetic standards. The Hendricks family faced fines for grass that was a 1/4 inch too tall. Some college kid got violated for parking his Honda in his own driveway because it was inconsistent with neighborhood character. The woman had turned the HOA into her personal kingdom, ruling through fear, fines, and enough paperwork to choke a bureaucrat. Board meetings were basically her royal court, where terrified homeowners came to beg forgiveness for crimes against suburban perfection. Most people paid up and kept quiet. Easier than fighting City Hall, right? I should have seen trouble coming when I started planning my driveway project. The farmhouse sat 300 feet back from the county road, connected by a dirt track that turned into a swamp every time someone watered their lawn. As an engineer who'd spent decades building proper infrastructure, that muddy mess offended me professionally. So I did everything right. County permits, professional surveyor, engineered drainage, a proper 300-foot paved access road, entirely within my property lines, built to last 50 years. The day I laid the first section of asphalt, breathing in that satisfying smell of hot tar, hearing the smooth hum of the roller compacting everything perfectly, I felt like I was finally building something permanent. That's when Constance struck. She appeared at my door the next morning like some suburban grim reaper, waving a citation that made my blood pressure spike 20 points. $300 for unauthorized road construction affecting neighborhood aesthetics. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. What this power-drunk dictator didn't realize, she'd just picked a fight with the one guy in Willowbrook who knew exactly how to make her regret it. Constance didn't waste any time showing her true colors. 3 days after that first citation, I found a certified letter jammed between my screen door and frame like a ransom note. The return address made my morning coffee taste like battery acid. Willowbrook HOA, urgent legal notice. Inside was a masterpiece of bureaucratic intimidation that would make a loan shark jealous. Not only was I still on the hook for the original $300 fine, but now they'd added $150 in administrative processing fees and another $75 for certified delivery costs. Simple math, pay $5 and $25 within 30 days, or they'd slap a lien on my property faster than you could say foreclosure. The letter even included a helpful paragraph about how liens could destroy my credit score, tank my refinancing options, and, this was rich, damage my standing in the community. The sheer audacity made the paper feel greasy in my hands. That afternoon, Constance arrived for round 2, bringing backup, some nervous pencil pusher in a discount suit who called himself the HOA's compliance officer. Apparently that's fancy talk for guy who holds Karen's clipboard while she destroys people's lives. "Mr. Webb," Constance announced, her designer heels clicking on my concrete like a death march. "I hope you've reconsidered. We're reasonable people, but rules are rules." I stood there watching this woman threaten me on my property for improving my land with my money, and something inside me snapped into focus. You know that crystalline moment when you realize you're not dealing with reasonable people? That's when engineering mode kicks in. "I'd like to review the HOA covenant documents," I said calmly. The compliance officer blinked like I'd asked for his firstborn. "I'm sorry?" "The legal documents that give you authority over my property. I want copies." Constance's smile froze solid. "Mr. Webb, surely we don't need to involve lawyers." "Who mentioned lawyers? I just want to understand what authority you're claiming here." That weekend, I spent my Saturday morning at the county records office, a building that smells like old paper, burnt coffee, and broken dreams. You'd be amazed what municipal filing cabinets can teach you when you know how to read them. 25 years of dealing with city bureaucrats had taught me that the devil's always in the details, buried 3 folders deep where lazy people never bother looking. And boy did I find details. Turns out the Willowbrook subdivision was platted back in 1987, when some developer thought my corner lot would make a perfect gas station. They marked it as future commercial development, which meant, and here's where that legal education I picked up designing municipal projects came in handy, my property was never technically subject to HOA authority. Some attorney back in the Reagan administration screwed up the paperwork and nobody had caught it for 35 years. The sound of justice was quieter than I expected, just papers rustling in a musty file drawer. But wait, it gets better. Buried deeper in those 1987 documents was something called an ingress-egress easement agreement. Basically a legal contract giving the subdivision access to the county road through a 50-foot strip along my property. Standard procedure, except for one beautiful detail that made my engineering heart sing. The agreement required the HOA to pay the property owner an annual maintenance fee. $500 per year starting in 1987. I ran those numbers 3 times just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. 36 years of unpaid fees, plus compound interest at the state-mandated 6% annually. The texture of those old documents felt like gold leaf under my fingertips as I calculated the total, $7,500 in unpaid fees. While Constance was threatening to lien my property over $525, she was sitting on a debt 15 times that amount. The irony was so perfect it hurt. Monday morning, I called the HOA office, where some secretary who sounded like she'd rather be getting a root canal answered after 4 rings. "Tell Ms. Hartwell that Marcus Webb called about the $7,500 in unpaid easement fees," I said sweetly. "She'll know what I'm talking about." Constance called back in exactly 18 minutes. Her voice had that particular strain you hear when someone's world starts cracking. "Mr. Webb, I don't know what kind of game—" "No game, Constance. Just property law. You wanted documents? I found some interesting ones." That evening, my neighbor Elena Rodriguez came over with homemade tamales and a story that made everything click into place. The smell of corn masa and perfectly spiced meat filled my kitchen while she told me about 3 years of Constance's systematic harassment. Bogus fines for garden decorations, mailbox colors, even the number of cars in her driveway during family gatherings. "She targets people who can't fight back," Elena said, watching her kids play safely in my fenced yard. "Single moms, immigrants, anyone who doesn't look like her vision of suburbia. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. The next morning, I sent Constance a certified letter of my own. 1 page, professionally formatted, with 30 days to pay those easement fees or face legal action. Her response came faster than an allergic reaction. Constance's retaliation came swift and vicious, like a rattlesnake with a law degree. Within 48 hours of my easement fee demand, she'd filed a formal complaint with the county zoning board, claiming my driveway violated setback requirements. The smell of desperation was thick as truck exhaust, never mind that I had permits, inspections, and approvals from 3 different county officials. But that was just her opening move. The real sucker punch came when my phone started ringing with confused clients. Apparently, Constance had been making her own calls, casually suggesting to anyone who'd listen that I was unreliable and the type of contractor who sues people over coffee temperature. Marcus? Tom Bradley from the county supervisor's office sounded genuinely puzzled. Got a weird call about you today. Some HOA lady claiming you're difficult to work with. What's she smoking? That bitter taste in my mouth? That was my reputation being poisoned by someone who'd never hired me to build so much as a birdhouse. Next came the neighborhood petition, 17 signatures on fancy letterhead demanding I bring my property into compliance with community standards. She'd gone door to door like some suburban missionary, collecting names from people who'd never even seen my driveway but were terrified of ending up on her hit list. I found it taped to my front door Tuesday morning, the paper soggy with dew and that particular stickiness that makes everything feel contaminated. The texture felt slimy between my fingers, like handling something diseased. But here's what Constance didn't realize. Every escalation from her side gave me more ammunition for my counterattack. I hired the best surveyor in the county, old school guy named Pete, who'd been mapping property lines since before satellites existed. Cost me $2,200, but when you're building a legal case, precision is everything. Pete's equipment could pinpoint property boundaries to within 2 inches, and what we discovered was absolutely beautiful. The HOA had been illegally dumping on my property for years. Those neat piles of brush, grass clippings, and construction debris that appeared after every community cleanup, all sitting 15 feet inside my property line. We're talking about systematic trespassing that, in civil court, could cost them about $500 per incident under state property law. I'd learned this trick during my municipal days. Most people don't realize that unauthorized dumping on private property carries automatic daily fines that compound faster than credit card debt. One pile of yard waste becomes a $15,000 lawsuit if you document it properly. The sound of Pete's surveying equipment beeping as it confirmed coordinates was like listening to a cash register ring up justice. But the real masterpiece came when I installed trail cameras. Professional-grade hunting cams with night vision, motion sensors, and GPS timestamps. Within 1 week, I had dozens of crystal-clear photos showing Constance's compliance officer cutting across my land to access the subdivision's back entrance, saving himself maybe 60 seconds of driving around the block. Each photograph was potential evidence in a trespassing lawsuit. Date stamps, facial recognition quality, GPS coordinates embedded in the metadata. Any halfway decent attorney could turn those images into a settlement check with more zeros than Constance's IQ. Meanwhile, she was making increasingly desperate moves at county zoning meetings, showing up with her petition brigade like some kind of suburban militia. The cheap perfume cloud announced their arrival 3 minutes before they walked through the door. What Constance didn't know, I'd been attending those same meetings for 25 years as a municipal engineer. The board chairman had approved dozens of my projects over the years. When she stood up at the podium, waving that petition like it was the Declaration of Independence, demanding immediate action against illegal construction, board chairman Rodriguez actually smiled. "Ma'am, we have Mr. Webb's permits on file. Everything was approved and inspected to code. Are you citing a specific violation, or just expressing general displeasure?" Watching Constance's face cycle through red, purple, and back to red again was worth missing dinner for. But then she crossed the line that changed everything. Elena called me that evening, voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "Marcus, she came to my house today, started asking questions about my documentation status and whether I had proper permits for my kids to attend school here." The audacity hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Going after me was one thing. I could handle Constance's petty tyranny. But targeting Elena, a hard-working single mom whose only crime was supporting me because of her accent and last name, That wasn't just neighborhood drama anymore. That was discrimination, harassment, and about 15 different civil rights violations wrapped up in suburban respectability politics. I spent that night in my workshop, surrounded by the comforting smell of WD-40 and metal shavings, planning my nuclear option. Every tool in that garage was precisely organized, perfectly maintained, ready for the right job. The next morning, I found my mailbox destroyed. Crowbar marks gouged deep in the metal, post bent like a broken bone. Game over, Constance. Time to show you what happens when you pick a fight with someone who actually knows how to win one. Constance's desperation was showing, and it smelled like burnt coffee mixed with pure panic.
Her latest brilliant strategy, trying to get the city council to emergency rezone my property as pending industrial review, which in bureaucrat speak means we'll tie you up in red tape until you surrender. She actually submitted a 12-page petition claiming my heavy construction activities posed a threat to residential safety standards. Heavy construction activities. I'd paved a driveway. But her real masterpiece was the traffic warfare campaign. Every morning during rush hour, Constance would park HOA vehicles across the easement entrance for safety inspections. Picture a white pickup with official HOA business magnets blocking 47 families from getting to work, while she stood there with a clipboard, pretending to measure things. The sound of car horns blaring and engines revving as neighbors tried to navigate her manufactured traffic jam was like a symphony of suburban rage. Pure psychological warfare designed to make everyone blame me for their inconvenience instead of her for creating it. Diabolical, in a pathetic kind of way. While Constance played traffic dictator, I was doing what engineers do best, gathering data. Freedom of Information Act requests are beautiful tools when you know how to use them. Most people don't realize that HOA financial records are technically public documents if you ask the right way. What I found made my blood pressure spike like a faulty pressure gauge. The HOA was $23,000 behind on road maintenance, roads that were legally their responsibility to keep up to municipal code. They owed another $8,000 to the landscaping company and hadn't paid insurance premiums in 4 months. But the real smoking gun was hiding in the administrative expenses line. $4,100 in recent charges that perfectly matched the hourly rate of Constance's divorce attorney. She was literally stealing from her neighbors to pay lawyers to hide her assets from her own husband. The texture of those financial documents felt greasy under my fingers, like handling evidence of a crime, which technically I was. That evening, Bill Hendricks appeared at my door like some kind of guardian angel with a briefcase. Bill was the former HOA treasurer, a retired accountant who'd quit in protest over Constance's creative bookkeeping, but had been too polite to make waves publicly. Not anymore. The smell of Old Spice and nervous determination filled my living room as Bill spread damning evidence across my coffee table. Original meeting minutes, unaltered financial statements, even recorded phone conversations where Constance admitted to temporarily borrowing HOA funds for personal emergencies. She threatened to sue me for defamation if I went public, Bill said, his hands steady despite the magnitude of what he was revealing. But watching her destroy Elena's family over a property dispute, that crossed the line. This was intelligence gold wrapped in moral outrage, exactly what I needed. Armed with Bill's evidence, I launched my psychological campaign. First, I installed a professional security system with motion-activated cameras covering every inch of the easement. Then I posted discreet signs. Private property, easement use monitored, all vehicles documented. The effect was immediate and beautiful. Residents who'd thoughtlessly driven through for years suddenly became hyper-aware they were crossing private land. You could see them slowing down, looking around nervously, realizing their daily access to the outside world depended entirely on my goodwill. The weight of that realization was heavier than concrete, and just as permanent. Constance's response was predictably desperate. She organized community awareness drives encouraging residents to use the easement as much as possible to assert our collective rights. She even hired unnecessary landscaping crews to make extra trips, thinking she was proving some kind of point. What she was actually doing was documenting her own criminal trespassing. Every additional vehicle was another line item in the federal lawsuit I was methodically building. In property law, each unauthorized use carries compound daily penalties that stack like Legos, and I was photographing every single brick. Meanwhile, the harassment of Elena escalated to criminal levels.
Anonymous notes appeared on her windshield questioning her right to live here. Someone called Child Protective Services with false reports about her kids being neglected and dangerous. The investigation was dismissed immediately, but the message was crystal clear: cross Queen Constance, and she'll try to destroy your family. That's when this stopped being about property rights and became about stopping a sociopath with municipal authority. The neighborhood was splitting apart like fractured concrete. 23 families had joined Elena's reform movement, but Constance's loyalists were getting increasingly vicious. The sound of angry voices echoed across backyards during evening gatherings, decades-old friendships ending over HOA politics. Property values were tanking as word spread about Willowbrook's access crisis. Real estate agents started steering clients toward other subdivisions, whispering about legal complications and neighborhood instability. My phone rang constantly with attorneys offering to take my case pro bono, sensing the kind of settlement numbers that make law firms salivate. Everyone could smell the lawsuit brewing like storm clouds gathering before a tornado. Constance had declared total war on the wrong engineer. Time to show her what happens when you bring a clipboard to a nuclear fight. The countdown to her destruction was about to begin. Everything changed the day I found the legal nuclear bomb buried in 40-year-old city records. I'd been spending my evenings at the municipal archives, digging through dusty filing cabinets that smelled like old paper and bureaucratic neglect. Most people would have given up after 3 days of squinting at faded photocopies. But 25 years of engineering had taught me that the devil lives in details other people ignore. That's when I found it. A 1987 city ordinance tucked between zoning amendments and water rights disputes. Perpetual access maintenance requirements for agricultural conversion subdivisions. Dry legal language that would put most people to sleep. But to my engineer's eye, it was pure gold. The ordinance was crystal clear. Any subdivision built on former farmland had to maintain their access roads to municipal standards. Potholes, drainage failures, faded signage, substandard surfaces, any violation could trigger immediate zoning revocation. The city could legally shut down residential status for the entire neighborhood, without appeal, without negotiation, without mercy. The sound of pages rustling in that silent archive room was like listening to Constance's political obituary being written in real time. But here's where it got beautiful. Willowbrook's main access road was a municipal code disaster. Potholes deep enough to swallow a mailbox, drainage so poor it flooded when someone overwatered their petunias, and road signs so faded you couldn't read them with night vision goggles. I'd been driving over those violations for months, feeling my truck bounce like a paint mixer, never realizing I was documenting grounds for shutting down the entire subdivision. The texture of that ordinance paper felt electric under my fingertips, like holding a loaded weapon. Meanwhile, Bill's financial intelligence was revealing the full scope of Constance's desperation. The HOA wasn't just broke, they'd been operating on embezzled funds and unauthorized loans for 18 months. She'd basically mortgaged the neighborhood's future to cover her personal legal bills. The numbers were devastating. Paying my $7,500 easement fees required a special assessment that needed 60% homeowner approval. But any assessment over $500 automatically triggered a mandatory state audit, and that audit would expose Constance's financial crimes faster than a house fire consumes evidence. She'd created the perfect legal trap for herself, and I was holding the key. But here's where the nuclear option became truly nuclear. I could legally revoke the easement with 90 days' notice. One certified letter, and 47 families would lose access to the county road. Their homes would become landlocked islands worth about as much as underwater real estate. Mortgage companies would demand immediate payment. Property values would crater. Life savings would evaporate overnight. The power was intoxicating and terrifying. I could destroy an entire neighborhood with a signature. That evening, Elena brought over homemade tamales and a dose of moral reality. The smell of corn masa and perfectly seasoned beef filled my kitchen while we wrestled with the ethics of mutually assured destruction. Those families never chose this war, Elena said, her voice soft but firm. Mrs. Peterson's been saving for her granddaughter's college fund. The Johnsons just had twins. They don't deserve to lose everything because Constance is a sociopath. She was absolutely right. I wanted justice, not mass casualties. The goal was stopping a tyrant, not punishing innocent people for having terrible leadership. But sitting there, watching Elena's kids play safely in my backyard while we discussed nuclear options, I realized something profound. Sometimes the threat of ultimate power is more effective than using it. Constance had ruled through fear for years because nobody had the leverage to stop her. Now someone did. I drafted my ultimatum: 60 days to pay the easement fees, remove Constance from power, and implement complete financial transparency. Meet those terms, or watch their neighborhood become worthless overnight. The countdown to her destruction was ticking louder than a time bomb. Time to find out if Constance was smart enough to surrender or stupid enough to call my bluff. Building the perfect revenge required the same methodical precision I'd used designing municipal water systems. Except this time, I was engineering Constance's political destruction. The centerpiece was an automated gate system that would look like reasonable security to any casual observer, but function as absolute access control in my hands. Solar-powered, remote-controlled, with magnetic card reader technology that could track every vehicle entering or leaving the subdivision. 3 access levels: emergency services, always open because I'm not a monster; residents, controlled through cards I could activate or deactivate remotely; and service vehicles, scheduled through my approval. The whole system costs $3,200, but when you're building leverage over 47 families, quality hardware is worth the investment. Installation day was nerve-wracking and satisfying in equal measure. The rhythmic beeping of backup alarms as concrete trucks poured footings, the metallic clang of steel posts being set in perfect alignment, the quiet hum of electronic systems coming online, it all sounded like justice being assembled one component at a time. Smart access control systems like this typically cost $5,000 to $8,000 installed, and they're incredibly effective for rural property security. The technology has gotten so reliable that most insurance companies offer discounts for gated access properties. While I was playing with electronics, the legal warfare was escalating beautifully. Sarah had filed the formal breach of contract notice demanding payment within 72 hours, or the 90-day easement revocation period would begin automatically. No negotiations, no extensions, no mercy for people who thought they could steal from property owners. But Constance's response was more desperate than I'd expected. She called an emergency board meeting for that same evening, according to Bill's intelligence reports. Apparently, she spent 2 hours screaming at the other board members about terrorist tactics and illegal extortion, demanding they authorize whatever legal fees were necessary to crush this threat to our community. The texture of panic in her voice, as Bill described it, was smooth and satisfying like polished marble. Meanwhile, Elena was building our grassroots coalition with the kind of strategic brilliance that made me respect her even more. Secret meetings at Miller's Diner became our war room, the smell of coffee and bacon grease mixing with the sound of neighbors planning their first real rebellion against suburban tyranny. 26 households had joined our reform movement, but Elena kept recruiting. She'd organized carpools to county meetings, created phone trees for rapid communication, and somehow managed to keep everyone focused on positive change instead of just destroying Constance. Her daughter Maya's TikTok account documenting HOA abuses had exploded to over 50,000 views, with comments from across the country sharing similar horror stories. Social media was amplifying our local fight into a national conversation about HOA accountability. But the real breakthrough came when I started leveraging my professional network. County Supervisor Tom Bradley admitted he'd been getting HOA abuse complaints district-wide for months. Building Inspector Rodriguez revealed that Constance had tried bribing him with community appreciation gifts, a federal crime that made my property dispute look like a parking ticket. Local newspaper reporter Sarah Salem was already investigating HOA corruption for a larger series on suburban governance. She was practically salivating at the chance to document actual financial crimes and systematic harassment. Every new ally felt like loading another round of ammunition into a legal shotgun pointed directly at Constance's political career. The psychological preparation was just as crucial as the tactical planning. I spent hours practicing staying calm under pressure, anticipating Constance's likely responses to each escalation. Elena helped by role-playing the worst-case scenarios. What if she tries turning neighbors against you? What if she fabricates evidence? What if she gets physical? Each potential crisis got a planned response, rehearsed until my reactions became automatic. My morning routine became a ritual of methodical justice. Black coffee at 5 a.m., reviewing security footage from overnight, updating evidence databases, and checking that all systems were ready for whatever Constance might try next. The soft blue glow of computer screens in pre-dawn darkness became the color of inevitable victory, But the most satisfying part was watching Constance's support network crumble in real time. Bill reported that board meetings had devolved into screaming matches, with Constance alienating her few remaining allies through increasingly paranoid accusations. She'd started accusing longtime neighbors of being infiltrators and saboteurs. The woman was cracking under pressure, making exactly the kind of erratic decisions that would justify everything I was about to do to her. 3 weeks into implementation, every piece was in position. Gate system operational and tested, legal documentation filed and served, community coalition organized and motivated, media contacts briefed and standing by, financial evidence compiled and weaponized. All that remained was waiting for Constance to make her final, desperate mistake. The one that would give me the perfect justification to destroy her completely. The trap was set with engineering precision. Now I just had to watch her walk straight into it, dragging her corruption and arrogance behind her like the chains she'd forged for herself. Game time was finally here. The moment of truth came at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, when I activated the gate that would transform 47 families into my unwilling negotiating partners. Installation had been completed in darkness, and now I stood watching steel and silicon transform raw power into elegant control. The soft mechanical hum of servo motors, the satisfying metallic click of magnetic locks engaging, it sounded like justice being assembled one precision component at a time. By 7:30 a.m., the first commuter discovered that their daily routine had fundamentally changed. Car doors slammed like gunshots as confused residents gathered around my gate, reading the professionally printed sign, "Automated Access Control, Contact HOA for Resident Cards, Emergency Services Always Admitted." The smell of morning coffee mixed with automotive exhaust and mounting frustration hung in the air like a toxic cloud of suburban inconvenience. Constance arrived at 8:15 a.m. like a natural disaster making landfall, her BMW sliding to a stop in a spray of gravel and pure rage. The rapid staccato of designer heels on asphalt announced her approach as she stormed toward the gate with the fury of a woman whose entire worldview was crumbling. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she screamed, her voice hitting that frequency that makes toddlers cry and property values drop. "You can't kidnap an entire neighborhood." I emerged from my workshop with a steaming coffee mug and the kind of calm that comes from holding all the cards. "Good morning, Constance. Beautiful day, isn't it? Just implementing reasonable security measures on my private property." The texture of her desperation was almost tangible as she grabbed the gate bars and shook them like a caged animal testing for weakness. The precision-engineered steel didn't budge. German manufacturing tends to be disappointingly reliable when you're having a meltdown. "This is illegal extortion." "Actually, it's property management. Check your easement agreement sometime." Fascinating reading. But here's where Constance's amateur hour tyranny revealed itself. Instead of immediately getting access cards to residents, she spent the entire afternoon calling lawyers, desperately hunting for someone stupid enough to challenge my legal position. The problem was beautiful in its simplicity. Every attorney she contacted asked to see the easement documentation first, and every attorney who read it told her exactly what she didn't want to hear. I had bulletproof legal authority to control access to my own land. By evening rush hour, cars were backing up like a fast food drive-thru staffed by sloths. The symphony of frustrated honking, confused shouting, and increasingly creative profanity carried across the subdivision like the sound of democracy getting its first real workout in years. But here's the mini twist that made everything perfect. Constance was holding her own neighbors hostage. I'd posted clear instructions for obtaining resident access cards through the HOA office, but she refused to distribute them pending her comprehensive legal review. She was literally making 47 families suffer just to spite me. The woman's commitment to self-destruction was almost artistic. The emergency board meeting that night drew 89 people, standing room only in a clubhouse designed for bridge tournaments and book discussions. The air was thick with the smell of cheap coffee, nervous sweat, and mounting insurrection. Constance positioned herself at the front like Napoleon addressing the troops before Waterloo, her voice trembling with righteous indignation as she declared my gate an act of suburban terrorism that demanded immediate legal retaliation. "Mr. Webb thinks he can hold our community hostage with his illegal blockade," she announced with enough drama to win a daytime Emmy. "But Americans don't negotiate with terrorists." The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast. She was calling me a terrorist while actively preventing her neighbors from accessing their own homes. That's when the evening took a turn that even I hadn't anticipated. Mrs. Patterson, an 80-year-old widow who'd lived in Willowbrook since the 1990s, stood up with the kind of authority that comes from outliving 3 HOA presidents and 2 husbands. "Constance, dear," she said in a voice sweet as poisoned honey, "perhaps before we discuss Mr. Webb's perfectly legal gate, you could explain why my grandson couldn't visit last weekend because you refused to give me an access card. He drove 6 hours from college, and you made him sleep in a hotel because of your tantrum." The room temperature dropped 20 degrees as 88 other residents realized they'd been collateral damage in Constance's personal vendetta. Elena's Reform Coalition came prepared with their own bombshells, documented evidence of Constance blocking access cards out of pure spite, financial records showing unpaid bills while she authorized her own legal fees, and testimony from residents who'd been harassed for supporting reform. By 9 p.m., even Constance's most loyal supporters were quietly slipping toward the exits like rats, abandoning a sinking yacht. The meeting dissolved into open rebellion, with multiple calls for immediate resignation and complete financial audits. Local news crews had arrived after Sarah Salem's article went viral, and suddenly Constance found herself explaining her access blocking strategy to reporters who specialized in making public officials look like idiots on television. The trap had been sprung perfectly. Now came the final act of her political suicide. Cornered animals are dangerous, and Constance proved she was willing to go full feral to save her crumbling empire. Her first move came at 2:47 a.m. on Thursday morning, a pathetic attempt at sabotage captured in high-definition clarity by my trail cameras. The sound of bolt cutters striking steel echoed through the darkness as she tried to cut the gate's power cables, her white pajamas glowing like a beacon of criminal stupidity under the infrared sensors. Watching the footage later was pure entertainment. Constance, crouched beside my gate in designer sleepwear and fuzzy slippers, frantically sawing at reinforced electrical conduit with hardware store bolt cutters. The metallic scraping sounds mixed with her increasingly frustrated grunting as she discovered that engineers tend to protect critical infrastructure from amateur vandalism. What she didn't realize was that the entire system ran on buried cables with backup power cells. Even if she'd succeeded, the gate would have stayed locked and the cameras would have kept recording her felony destruction of property. By sunrise, I had crystal clear evidence of attempted sabotage, trespassing, and enough criminal charges to make her legal troubles multiply like rabbits in springtime. But Constance's desperation was just getting started. Over the next week, she launched a character assassination campaign that would have impressed Stalin's propaganda ministry. Suddenly, rumors were circulating about my mental stability, my history of violent behavior, and my alleged connections to anti-government extremist groups. The smell of desperation was thick as motor oil as she made her rounds, whispering poison in neighbors' ears about how I was clearly unstable and probably dangerous. According to Elena's intelligence network, Constance was telling anyone who'd listen that I kept suspicious chemicals in my workshop and had been making threatening phone calls to board members. All lies. But desperate people don't worry about truth when their world is collapsing. Her masterpiece of malicious creativity came when she filed false police reports claiming suspicious activity at my property. 3 different calls in 5 days, reports of strange lights and sounds from my workshop, complaints about unusual vehicular traffic on my driveway, and my personal favorite, a claim that I was stockpiling weapons and explosives. The texture of those police encounters was smooth and professional, like dealing with competent people who'd seen this kind of nonsense before. Officer Martinez responded to all 3 calls with the weary patience of someone who'd handled plenty of neighbor disputes turned ugly. "Mr. Webb," he said during the 3rd visit, standing in my workshop surrounded by perfectly normal contractor tools. "I'm guessing this is related to your HOA situation?" "Safe guess," I replied, handing him coffee and the documentation proving Constance's harassment campaign. She's trying to manufacture a criminal case because the legal one isn't going her way. Meanwhile, Constance had hired a new attorney with money the HOA didn't have, some ambulance chaser from the next county who specialized in quick settlements and intimidation tactics. The guy showed up at my door wearing a cheap suit that smelled like desperation and cigarettes, demanding I cease and desist all harassment of his client. I invited him in for coffee and an education in property law that sent him scurrying back to his strip mall office faster than a cockroach when the lights come on.
But the real escalation came when Constance crossed the line that turned this from neighborhood drama into something much darker. Elena called me Thursday evening, voice shaking with controlled fury. "Marcus, she's gone after my kids." Apparently, Constance had called Child Protective Services, claiming Elena's children were neglected and potentially endangered due to her involvement in anti-community activities. She'd also contacted the school district questioning whether Elena's kids were legally authorized to attend local schools. The taste of absolute rage is metallic and bitter, like blood from biting your tongue to keep from saying something that'll land you in jail. Going after me was fair game. Targeting Elena was crossing a line. But using government agencies to harass innocent children? That was declaring war on everything decent about civilization. That night, I sat in my workshop surrounded by the comforting smell of WD-40 and precision tools, planning Constance's complete and total destruction. Every implement in that space was perfectly organized, meticulously maintained, ready for whatever job required absolute precision. The surveillance cameras had captured her attempted sabotage. The financial records documented her embezzlement. The legal documentation proved her violation of property rights. Now she'd added filing false reports, harassment of children, and abuse of government resources to her growing criminal portfolio. Meanwhile, the neighborhood was fracturing along battle lines that looked increasingly like a civil war. Anonymous flyers appeared overnight claiming Elena and I were foreign infiltrators trying to destroy American community values. Someone spray-painted "traitor" on Elena's mailbox, using the kind of logic that makes you wonder about public education funding. Property values were tanking as word spread about Willowbrook's access crisis and community violence. Real estate agents started steering clients toward other subdivisions, whispering about legal complications and neighborhood instability. The sound of my phone ringing constantly with attorneys offering to take the case pro bono was like listening to vultures gathering around roadkill. Everyone could smell the massive settlement brewing, and the legal feeding frenzy was about to begin. Constance had made her final mistake. Time to show her what happens when you declare war on someone who actually knows how to fight. The county supervisor called the public meeting for Tuesday evening at 7 p.m., and by 6:30 the parking lot looked like a tailgate party for justice. 127 people packed into the county building's main conference room, every folding chair occupied, people standing 3 deep along the walls, the smell of nervous anticipation mixing with burnt coffee, and the kind of tension that makes fluorescent lights seem to hum louder. Local news crews had set up in the back, cameras rolling as reporters prepared to document what everyone sensed would be the final chapter of Willowbrook's civil war. The metallic click of camera equipment being adjusted sounded like weapons being readied for battle. I'd spent 3 days preparing my presentation with the methodical precision that 25 years of engineering had drilled into my DNA. Professional slideshow, organized evidence packets, timeline documentation that read like a criminal indictment. Every photo time-stamped, every financial record cross-referenced, every legal violation cataloged with the kind of attention to detail that makes courtroom attorneys weep with joy. The texture of those evidence folders felt like holding ammunition for justice. County Supervisor Tom Bradley called for order with the authority of someone who'd refereed enough public meltdowns to know when things were about to get interesting. "We're here to address the access dispute in Willowbrook subdivision," he announced, voice carrying clearly through the packed room. "Mr. Webb, you requested this hearing. The floor is yours." I stood up, clicked to my first slide, and began systematically dismantling Constance Hartwell's entire criminal enterprise. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're about to see is documentation of systematic financial fraud, harassment of residents, and abuse of municipal authority that's been hiding behind HOA letterhead for over 2 years. The first bombshell, high-definition photos of Constance attempting to sabotage my gate at 2:47 a.m., her white pajamas glowing like a neon sign advertising criminal stupidity. The room erupted in gasps and nervous laughter as people watched their HOA president reduced to prowling around with bolt cutters like some suburban burglar. The second wave, Bill Hendricks's financial records showing $12,000 in unauthorized personal legal fees, unpaid maintenance bills totaling $31,000, and insurance policies that had lapsed 4 months earlier, leaving the entire subdivision legally unprotected. But the nuclear payload came when I revealed the easement agreement that nobody in that room had seen before tonight.
The HOA has owed my property $7,500 in annual maintenance fees since 1987, I announced, clicking to a slide showing the compound interest calculation. Fees that were legally required and have never been paid. Meanwhile, Ms. Hartwell has been using HOA funds to pay her personal divorce attorney. That's when Constance finally snapped. She'd been sitting in the front row like a defendant at her own trial, face cycling through shades of red that would make a thermometer jealous. But when I displayed her embezzlement records on the big screen for everyone to see, she exploded like a pressure cooker with a broken valve. "This is all lies!" she screamed, jumping to her feet with enough force to knock her folding chair backwards. "He's a terrorist. He's holding our neighborhood hostage. He's probably not even legally allowed to own property." The sound of her voice cracking under pressure was like listening to chalk on a blackboard. Painful, but deeply satisfying when you knew it meant the end was near. County Supervisor Bradley tried to restore order, but Constance was beyond reason now. She started pointing wildly around the room, accusing random residents of being part of the conspiracy, and demanding that someone arrest me for economic terrorism. That's when Elena Rodriguez stood up with the quiet dignity of someone who'd endured 2 years of systematic harassment and was finally ready to speak truth to power. "Ms. Hartwell," Elena said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment, "you called Child Protective Services on my children because I supported financial transparency. You questioned my immigration status because I disagreed with your leadership. You've turned our neighborhood into a dictatorship run by someone who steals from the people she's supposed to serve." The room went dead silent except for the soft whir of news cameras capturing every word. But the mic drop moment came when Bill Hendricks walked to the podium carrying a banker's box full of financial records that represented 2 years of documented corruption. "I've served as treasurer for community organizations for 37 years, Bill announced with the moral authority of a man who'd never stolen a penny from anyone. "I've never seen financial mismanagement this blatant or this criminal. Constance Hartwell has embezzled community funds, violated fiduciary duties, and committed fraud against every family in Willowbrook." He opened the box and began reading specific transactions. $1,200 to her personal attorney, $800 in administrative lunches at restaurants 40 miles away, $2,400 in consulting fees paid to her unemployed nephew for work that was never performed. By the time Bill finished, 3 people were openly weeping, 17 others were demanding criminal prosecution, and Constance was sitting in stunned silence as her entire world collapsed in front of news cameras that would broadcast her destruction across 3 counties. County Sheriff Martinez stepped forward with a subpoena that had been prepared earlier that day. Constance Hartwell was officially under criminal investigation for embezzlement, fraud, and abuse of office. Justice had finally come to Willowbrook, delivered with the precision of an engineering solution and the satisfaction of watching a bully get exactly what they deserved. The aftermath moved faster than water flowing downhill toward its natural destination. Within 24 hours of that public hearing, Constance Hartwell's resignation letter arrived via certified mail. 3 sentences of bitter defeat that officially ended her reign of suburban terror. The gate access cards were distributed to all residents that same afternoon, the satisfying click of magnetic locks disengaging for legitimate users sounding like democracy being restored one vehicle at a time. Elena Rodriguez was elected interim HOA president by unanimous vote at an emergency meeting that felt more like a celebration than a corporate reorganization. Her first official act was writing me a check for $7,500 in unpaid easement fees, followed immediately by implementing the financial transparency measures that should have existed all along. The criminal charges against Constance moved through the system with the efficiency that justice achieves when the evidence is overwhelming and the defendant has no political allies left to protect her. She pled guilty to embezzlement and fraud in exchange for a restitution agreement that would keep her financially accountable for the next decade. Watching her accept responsibility in front of Judge Patterson was like witnessing gravity finally catching up with someone who'd been falling for years but hadn't hit the ground yet. The real satisfaction, though, came from what we built in the wreckage of her corruption. The Willowbrook Community Reform Coalition became a model for HOA accountability that other neighborhoods started copying. Elena implemented monthly financial reports, term limits for board positions, and resident oversight committees that made future corruption nearly impossible. The smell of fresh start filled the air like morning coffee as people who'd lived in fear for years finally felt safe to improve their own properties without facing harassment. but the most meaningful change was the community scholarship fund we created from the recovered embezzlement money. The Willowbrook Accountability Scholarship provides $20,500 annually to local high school graduates who demonstrate leadership and civic engagement, essentially paying kids to become the kind of citizens who won't tolerate future constances. Elena's daughter Maya was the first recipient, her TikTok documentation of HOA abuses having evolved into a genuine passion for investigative journalism. Watching her accept that scholarship with tears in her eyes was worth more than any settlement check could ever be. My own life settled into the kind of peaceful routine I'd moved to Willowbrook to find in the first place. The consulting business I'd started helping other neighborhoods fight HOA corruption grew organically through word-of-mouth referrals. Turns out there's serious demand for engineers who understand both municipal law and strategic warfare. Property values recovered within 6 months as news spread about Willowbrook's transformation from suburban dictatorship to actual community governance. Real estate agents started using us as an example of effective neighborhood management in their marketing materials. The annual Community Access Day celebration Elena organized became a tradition that draws people from across the county. Families gathering in the park where Constance's corruption once festered. Kids playing on playground equipment funded by recovered embezzlement money. The sound of laughter replacing years of whispered complaints about arbitrary fines. The texture of genuine community feels different than manufactured conformity, warmer, more organic, built on mutual respect instead of fear. 6 months later, I installed a community garden where the old HOA office used to stand. The smell of fresh soil and growing vegetables replaced the stale air of bureaucratic oppression, and watching neighbors work together to create something beautiful felt like the perfect ending to our suburban revolution. Bill Hendricks returned as treasurer with new oversight responsibilities that make embezzlement nearly impossible. His monthly financial reports are posted online and discussed at meetings where residents actually show up because they're invested in outcomes rather than intimidated by leadership. The gate system I'd installed as a weapon became a genuine security asset that residents appreciate. Home insurance rates dropped, package theft disappeared, and the community finally felt like the safe neighborhood people had paid premium prices to live in. Looking back, the $300 fine that started this whole war seems almost quaint compared to the transformation it triggered. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to a community is having a tyrant push exactly the wrong person too far. Your turn. Drop a comment below and share your worst HOA horror story. I read every single one, and the most outrageous might become my next investigation. And if this story of justice served cold resonated with you, hit that subscribe button, because there are corrupt HOAs everywhere, and someone needs to document their downfall with the precision they deserve. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments.